What made my daughter change personalities overnight? My oldest child, Olivia, walked past her little sister, Ruby, who was holding up a drawing that said, "I love you, Livy," and didn't even look at it. Ruby started sobbing, asking what she did wrong, and I had to carry her to the couch while my heart broke into pieces. My son Leo tried to grab Olivia's sleeve, but she yanked her arm away so hard he fell backwards, and I watched my teenage daughter step over him like he was trash on the sidewalk. I couldn't understand what was happening to my baby girl, the same daughter who used to wake up early just to make her siblings special breakfasts. She taught Leo to ride his bike, slept on Ruby's floor during thunderstorms, and never once complained when they crashed her sleepovers with friends. This was the girl who begged me for siblings when she was 4, who cried happy tears when each baby was born, who called them her babies, even though she was just a kid herself. But something changed, and suddenly Olivia became a ghost in our house. She started eating breakfast at 5 in the morning to avoid seeing them, stayed at the library until closing to miss dinner, and locked her bedroom door the second she got home. When Ruby showed her a perfect spelling test, Olivia walked past like she wasn't there, and I watched my 6-year-old's face crumble. Leo would wait by her door every night with his baseball glove, and she would step over him without a word, leaving him sitting there until I carried him to bed. The worst part was watching my younger kids destroy themselves trying to figure out what they'd done wrong. Ruby stopped singing, stopped coloring, stopped doing all the things she used to do with her big sister. Leo quit his baseball team because practicing without Olivia wasn't worth it, and he started having nightmares where he screamed her name. They would sit outside her locked door for hours, taking turns apologizing for crimes they hadn't committed, and I felt like screaming at my oldest for what she was doing to them. My husband tried talking to Olivia, but she insisted nothing was wrong, just busy with junior year. Her grades were perfect. Her teacher said she seemed fine, but she stopped coming to Leo's games after never missing a single one in 5 years. She skipped Ruby's birthday party, claiming she had to study, and when I forced her to sit with us at dinner, she flinched every time the little one spoke to her. I wanted to shake her, to demand she tell me why she was torturing her siblings who worshipped her. Then I noticed the fear creeping in around the edges of whatever was happening. Olivia installed a lock on her bedroom door, kept her windows locked even in summer, and checked the house alarm obsessively before bed. She started doing her own laundry separately, threw away every photo of her with the kids, and began carrying pepper spray in her backpack. She took different routes home from school every day, and when I asked why, she just stared at me with hollow eyes. I found out Olivia had been telling her teachers she was an only child, and that's when my worry turned to real fear. Her friend's mom called, confused because Olivia had been saying her siblings moved away to live with their dad, which made no sense since my husband was right here. The school counselor called about an essay where Olivia wrote about protecting people by staying away from them, and when I confronted her about the lies, she just said it was easier than explaining the truth. One night I found Ruby in the hallway with scissors, chunks of her beautiful hair on the floor, saying maybe if she looked different, Olivia would love her again. Leo had started wetting the bed at 8 years old, and my husband wanted to send Olivia to therapy, but she said if we made her talk to anyone, she would never speak to us again. The threat in her voice made my blood run cold because I knew she meant it. I started following my own daughter like a private investigator, and what I saw made everything worse. She would stand outside the elementary school during recess, watching her siblings play from behind the fence, taking pictures while tears ran down her face. She went to every one of Leo's baseball games but hid in the parking lot, and once when Ruby fell on the playground, Olivia started running toward her before stopping like she'd hit an invisible wall. Then I overheard her on the phone, begging someone to leave our family alone, saying she was doing what they asked, staying away from the kids so they wouldn't hurt them. She kept repeating that she would never tell anyone what happened that night if they just left Ruby and Leo alone, and when she hung up, she was shaking so violently she could barely stand. My maternal instincts went haywire. I searched her bag and found a note that made my hands shake. Every word you speak to them puts them in danger, so if you really love them, you'll let them hate you. When Olivia saw me holding it, her face went white, and she grabbed my arms hard enough to bruise. I stood there holding the note while Olivia gripped my arms hard enough to leave marks, her eyes wild with panic and something that looked like relief mixed with fear. She whispered that I shouldn't have found it, that I made everything worse and now they would know she told someone. Before I could say anything back, she ran to her room and I heard the new lock click into place, leaving me shaking in the hallway with more questions than answers. My arms hurt where her fingers dug in, and I looked down to see red marks already forming on my skin. I waited outside her door for 20 minutes, but she wouldn't answer when I knocked or called her name. The house felt too quiet, like the walls were holding their breath, and I finally went downstairs to wait for Suresh to get home from work. I put the note in a plastic bag like I'd seen on crime shows, trying not to touch it more than I already had, and I hid it in my desk drawer where the kids wouldn't find it. Ruby and Leo were at their after-school program until 5, which gave me 2 hours to figure out what to do next. I kept checking my phone, willing Suresh to text that he was leaving work early, but the screen stayed blank. When he finally walked through the door at 6:30, I grabbed his arm and pulled him into the kitchen before he could even take off his coat. I showed him the note after the kids were asleep, and we sat at the kitchen table trying to make sense of the words. He wanted to call the police right away, but I reminded him that Olivia said she would never speak to us again if we told anyone. We sat there for an hour going in circles, and finally Suresh said we needed to start writing everything down, every strange thing Olivia had done in the past few weeks. He suggested we check our home security camera footage to see if anyone had been watching the house, and I felt stupid for not thinking of that myself. We agreed to gather evidence first, to figure out who they were and what happened that night before we made any moves that might put the kids in more danger. I barely slept that night, and when my alarm went off at 5:30, I was already awake staring at the ceiling. I got up and stood by the front window, watching through a crack in the curtains as Olivia left for school at dawn like she always did. She checked over her shoulder 3 times before she reached the bus stop, and each time she looked back at our house like she expected someone to be following her. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the note, making sure every word was clear and readable in the photos. Then I pulled up my sleeve and took pictures of the bruises on my arms where she had grabbed me, the marks dark purple against my skin. I made coffee and opened my laptop at the kitchen table, starting a document where I wrote down every weird thing Olivia had done since this all started. The list got longer and longer as I remembered details I'd tried to ignore, like how she threw away all the photos of her with the kids, and how she started doing her laundry separately from the rest of the family. Suresh came downstairs in his work clothes and suggested we look at the security footage right away, so I logged into the camera system on my laptop while he stood behind me watching the screen. I spent the whole morning going through 2 weeks of footage and my stomach dropped when I spotted a car I didn't recognize driving slowly past our house. The gray sedan appeared 6 different times in the footage, always around the time the kids got home from the school. In one clip, the car sat parked across the street for 20 minutes while Ruby played in the front yard, and I felt sick watching it. I took screenshots of every instance, writing down the timestamps and adding them to a folder on my computer that I labeled with that day's date. Suresh had to leave for work, but he made me promise to call him if anything else happened, and I locked the door behind him twice to make sure it was secure. Ruby got home from the school at 3:15, dropped off by the program van like always, and she came inside asking again if I knew why Olivia didn't love her anymore. I had to fight back tears while I told her that Olivia loved her very much but was going through something hard right now. Ruby pulled a piece of paper from her backpack, another drawing she made during art class, and this one showed our whole family holding hands with Olivia's shape separated and standing alone on the other side of the page. The teacher had written a note on the back asking if everything was okay at home, and I knew I would have to come up with some kind of answer that didn't give away what was really happening. I hugged Ruby and told her to go play in her room, and she walked upstairs slowly, like her legs were too heavy to lift. An hour later, Leo came through the front door earlier than expected, because his baseball practice got canceled due to rain. He dropped his backpack by the door and went straight upstairs, and I heard him sit down outside Olivia's locked bedroom door with his glove in his lap. I stood at the bottom of the stairs listening to him talk softly through the door about how his team won their last game, and how he wished she could have seen his home run. He kept talking for 30 minutes, describing every play and every hit, but Olivia never answered or made any sound from inside her room. Finally, Leo came downstairs with tears running down his face, and he asked me what he did to make his sister hate him so much. I pulled him onto my lap, even though he was getting too big for it, and I told him he didn't do anything wrong, but the words felt empty because I couldn't explain what was really going on. After I got both kids settled with a movie in the living room, I went back to my laptop and pulled up the list I'd been making of everywhere Olivia went before her behavior changed. I needed to know more about that night she mentioned on the phone, the night that started all of this. Suresh came home for dinner and I showed him the list, and he remembered that Olivia had a sleepover at a friend's house about 6 weeks ago. I went to my file cabinet where I kept all the permission slips and school papers, and I found the one from that night. The sleepover was at Jolene Hickman's house 3 blocks away, and I realized that was right before everything started, right before Olivia became a different person. I showed Suresh the permission slip and watched his face change as he made the same connection I did. That evening after the kids went to bed, I decided to ask Olivia about the sleepover in a casual way that wouldn't make her shut down. I found her in the kitchen getting a glass of water, and I mentioned the Hickman house like I was just making conversation. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She went completely white and the glass slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. She backed away from me like I'd just threatened her, and when I asked if she was okay, she said it was fine. Just a normal sleepover. But her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't pick up the broken glass. I cleaned it up while she ran back to her room, and I heard her crying through the door. The kind of crying that sounds like it's being ripped out of someone's chest. I waited until morning to make my next move, and after Olivia left for school and the younger kids were at their program, I called Jolene Hickman pretending I wanted to plan another sleepover. Her voice got strange the second I mentioned that night, and she said the girls had fun, but then quickly added that maybe Olivia was too busy with junior year for sleepovers now. I pushed for details about what they did that night, asking about movies or games, and she became defensive. She said she didn't remember much because the girls stayed up late in the basement and she went to bed early. The conversation felt wrong in ways I couldn't quite name, like she was reading from a script someone told her to memorize. I thanked her and hung up and immediately called Suresh at work to tell him something was off about the whole thing. He said he would come home early, and when he walked through the door an hour later, I was already grabbing my car keys. We decided to drive past the Hickman house to see if anything seemed strange, and I felt like a detective in a bad movie as we rolled slowly down their street. The gray sedan from our security footage was parked in their driveway, and my heart started beating so fast I thought I might pass out. Through the front window, I could see a teenage boy who had to be Jolene's son, Axel, and I realized this might be the person who had been threatening Olivia all along. I drove away from the Hickman house with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, while Suresh asked if I was okay. I told him I needed to get home right away and look up everything I could find about Axel Hickman online. The second we walked through the door, I went straight to my laptop and typed his name into the search bar. His social media profiles came up immediately, and I clicked through them one by one while Suresh looked over my shoulder. Axel's posts were full of angry comments about girls who rejected him, and he shared videos about how women need to be controlled and put in their place. I felt sick reading his words, but I kept scrolling because I needed to understand who was threatening my daughter. His friend list showed hundreds of people, and when I searched for Olivia's name, I found her account connected to his. I went back through his photos to 6 weeks ago, and there it was. Pictures from the sleepover night at his house. The first photo showed 5 girls sitting in a basement with sleeping bags spread out on the floor. I zoomed in and spotted Olivia in the corner looking uncomfortable with her arms wrapped around her knees. The next photo showed the girls watching a movie, and Olivia had moved even farther into the corner. Then I found the picture that made my stomach drop. Axel was standing in the basement doorway with his phone in his hand, and he was staring directly at the girls with an expression that made me want to throw up. I took screenshots of everything and saved them to a folder on my desktop. Suresh suggested we call the police right away, but I reminded him that Olivia had threatened to stop talking to us if we involved anyone. He argued that we already had enough evidence to at least talk to someone, and I realized he was right. I found the non-emergency police line number and called it while my heart pounded in my chest. The person who answered transferred me to Detective Russell Copeland, and I explained that my daughter was threatened but wouldn't talk about it. He agreed to meet with me that afternoon at the police station, and I grabbed all my documentation to bring with me. Detective Copeland turned out to be a middle-aged man with kind eyes who listened carefully while I spread everything out on his desk. I showed him the threatening note, the security footage of the gray sedan, the timeline I had created, and the screenshots from Axel's social media. He studied each piece of evidence and asked questions about when things started and how Olivia had been acting. I told him about her complete personality change and how she stopped talking to her siblings to protect them. He nodded slowly and said he understood my fear, but without Olivia's statement or direct evidence of threats, there was limited action he could take legally. I felt my hope deflating as he explained that the note was concerning, but didn't specifically name who wrote it or what would happen. The security footage showed a car driving past our house, but that wasn't illegal on its own. He advised me to keep documenting everything and consider getting a lawyer involved who could help us understand our options. I left the police station feeling frustrated that the law couldn't protect us better, but I understood his position. That afternoon, I called a family lawyer whose name I found online, and she specialized in protecting minors. She agreed to talk with me over the phone right away, and I explained the whole situation from the beginning. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said that if Olivia was assaulted, the statute of limitations meant we still had time to pursue charges. The threatening note could be witness intimidation or extortion, and both were serious crimes. However, she emphasized multiple times that Olivia needed to be willing to talk, and forcing her could make things worse psychologically. She suggested finding a therapist who worked specifically with teenage assault victims because they would know how to help Olivia feel safe enough to open up. I thanked her and wrote down the names of 3 therapists she recommended. That night, I couldn't sleep, and at 2 in the morning, I went downstairs to get some water. I found Olivia in the kitchen making a sandwich, and she jumped when she saw me. I decided this was my chance to try reaching her again, so I walked slowly toward her and told her gently that I knew something bad happened at the Hickman house. She froze completely with the knife still in her hand, and tears started running down her face. She whispered that I didn't understand what he would do to Ruby and Leo if she told anyone. Her voice was so small and broken that I wanted to cry, but I forced myself to stay calm. I promised her that we could protect the whole family, and that I had already talked to the police and a lawyer. She shook her head hard and said I couldn't stop him because he was always watching us. She said he had pictures of Ruby at recess and Leo at baseball practice, and he sent them to her phone to prove he could get to them anytime. I reached out to hug her, but she backed away and ran upstairs to her room. I heard her lock click into place, and I stood in the kitchen crying quietly so I wouldn't wake anyone else. The next morning, I called a security company and had them come install additional cameras around our house that would send alerts to my phone whenever they detected movement. I also called a locksmith to change all our door locks, and I only gave new keys to Suresh and myself. I didn't even give one to Olivia because I was worried about who might get access to it if someone threatened her. Suresh took the day off work so he could drive the kids to and from the school, while I stayed home monitoring the camera feeds on my laptop. I watched every car that drove past and every person who walked by our house. At 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a movement alert, and I pulled up the camera feed to see the gray sedan driving slowly past our house again. This time it stopped directly in front, and I could see Axel clearly in the driver's seat. He sat there looking at our home for almost a minute while I took screenshot after screenshot. I called Detective Copeland immediately, and he said he would send a patrol car to drive through our neighborhood more often, but without evidence of a direct threat, he couldn't do much more. The feeling of being so helpless made me want to scream into my pillow. I decided to pick up Ruby from the school myself instead of letting Suresh do it because I needed to get out of the house. I parked near the playground and waited for the bell to ring. While I was sitting there, I noticed someone standing behind the fence near the playground, and when I looked closer, I realized it was Olivia. She was partially hidden behind a tree watching Ruby play with her friends. I could see she was crying and she kept taking photos on her phone like she was trying to hold on to these moments. Ruby must have spotted her because she started running toward the fence calling Olivia's name over and over. Olivia turned and walked away quickly without looking back, and Ruby stood at the fence sobbing. I got out of my car and went to get her, and I had to carry her back while she asked why Olivia ran away from her. I didn't know what to say, so I just held her tight and let her cry against my shoulder. That evening after the kids were in bed, I remembered that we had a shared family computer in the den that Olivia sometimes used for homework. I opened it up and checked the browser history and email accounts. In Olivia's trash folder, I found an unsent email and my hands started shaking as I read it. She had written about keeping her siblings safe by staying away from them and how much she missed making them breakfast and helping with their homework. She said that every word she spoke to them put them in danger and she couldn't risk it. The email wasn't addressed to anyone, just her own thoughts that she had typed out at 4 a.m. 3 weeks ago. I printed it and added it to my evidence file that was getting thicker every day. The next morning, Francine Barclay called asking if Suresh and I could come meet with her about Olivia's essay. I brought copies of everything I had documented and spread them across her desk. Her expression grew more serious as she reviewed each piece of evidence, and she kept shaking her head like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She explained that as a mandated reporter, she was required to report suspected abuse, but she was worried that doing so might put Olivia at greater risk if she refused to cooperate with investigators. We spent an hour discussing different strategies for getting Olivia to trust us enough to tell the truth. Francine suggested that I try giving Olivia more control over the situation by offering her choices instead of making demands. That night, I sat down and wrote Olivia a letter explaining that I knew she was protecting us and that I was proud of her strength. I told her that I understood she was scared, but that staying silent was actually putting everyone in more danger because we couldn't fight an enemy we couldn't see. I explained that we had lawyers and police who wanted to help, but they needed her to tell them what happened. I slid the letter under her door and sat in the hallway waiting. I could hear her crying softly as she read it, and the sound broke my heart into even smaller pieces. 20 minutes passed, and I was about to give up when her door opened just a crack. She whispered through the opening that she was scared of what would happen if she told anyone the truth. I slid down to sit with my back against the wall and spoke through the gap in her door. I promised we would do this at her pace and that she didn't have to carry this alone anymore. She asked in a shaky voice if I could promise that Ruby and Leo wouldn't get hurt. I told her honestly that I couldn't promise that, but I could promise that staying silent wasn't keeping them safe either. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever, and I could hear her breathing on the other side of the door. Then the door opened wider and she stepped back to let me in. I sat on the edge of her bed while she stood by the window staring at her hands. She started talking in a whisper so quiet I had to lean forward to hear. She said Axel cornered her in the basement during the sleepover after the other girls fell asleep upstairs. She described what he did and how he recorded it on his phone while telling her that if she ever told anyone, he would hurt Ruby and Leo. My stomach turned over, but I forced myself to stay calm and just listen. She explained that he'd been texting her from different numbers ever since that night. He sent photos of Ruby at recess and Leo at baseball practice to prove he was watching them. Every message reminded her that their safety depended on her silence and staying away from them. I felt rage like nothing I'd ever experienced before, but I made myself take slow breaths. I thanked her for trusting me with the truth and asked if she still had any of the messages. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and showed me a hidden folder. There were dozens of texts with photos of her siblings and threats about what would happen if she talked. I took photos of every single message with my own phone while she watched nervously. I documented the phone numbers and timestamps and made sure I captured every detail. When I finished, I pulled her into a hug and felt her whole body shaking. I called Detective Copeland right away, and he said he would come to our house that evening. He arrived with a female detective who introduced herself and explained she worked with assault cases. Olivia sat between me and the female detective on the couch and showed them the messages. She described what Axel did in the basement, and the detective took notes while asking gentle questions. The detective explained that what Axel did was assault, and the threatening messages were extortion and witness intimidation. She said they had enough evidence to start an investigation and would obtain Axel's phone records. Olivia asked what would happen next, and the detective laid out the process step by step. They stayed for 2 hours going through everything and documenting all the evidence. After they left, I kept all 3 kids home from the school the next morning because I was too scared to let them out of my sight. I called my boss and explained I needed emergency family leave. Suresh did the same with his job. We spent the day checking every window lock and keeping the kids entertained inside while we waited for Detective Copeland to call with updates. Ruby and Leo could sense something was wrong, but we told them we were having a special family day. We played board games and made cookies and tried to act normal. Leo found one of his old drawings that showed Olivia teaching him to ride his bike. He asked if he could leave it outside her door with a note. I helped him write a simple message that said, "I miss you, Livy." We placed it on the floor outside her room and went back downstairs. An hour later, Olivia emerged from her room holding the drawing against her chest. Tears ran down her face as she stood in the hallway looking at Leo's careful printing. She didn't go back into her room right away. Instead, she sat at the top of the stairs where she could hear Leo playing in the living room below. I watched her from the kitchen and saw her wiping her eyes while listening to her brother's voice. Detective Copeland called that afternoon to say they'd obtained Axel's phone records. Multiple threatening messages came from his number, and from burner phones registered to addresses near his house. He said they were building a case, but needed more time to gather evidence that would hold up in court. He warned me that Axel's family would likely hire a lawyer and try to say Olivia was lying. He suggested we get a protective order to keep Axel away from our family. I spent the rest of the afternoon filling out paperwork for an emergency protective order. The lawyer I'd talked to earlier helped me word everything correctly. We documented every instance of threatening behavior and surveillance. She explained that if the judge granted the order, Axel would have to stay at least 500 feet away from our home and the kids' schools. We included photos of the gray sedan and screenshots of all the threatening messages. That night, after everyone was asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about everything. I opened the family computer and checked Olivia's email trash folder again. I found another note dated just 2 days ago. My hands started shaking as I read her words about wanting to die because it was the only way to keep everyone safe. She wrote that she couldn't live with the fear anymore, and that her siblings would be better off without her. I felt sick realizing how close we'd come to losing her. I ran to wake up Suresh and showed him the note. We both sat there in the dark reading it over and over. He said we needed to get Olivia into therapy immediately. I called the crisis hotline and explained the situation to the person who answered. They gave me the name of a therapist named Allegra Neff, who worked with teenage trauma. I left a message on her voicemail at 2 in the morning. Allegra called back first thing the next morning and agreed to see Olivia for an emergency appointment that same day. I was grateful when Olivia didn't fight me about going. We drove to the therapist's office in silence. Allegra was a calm woman in her 40s with kind eyes. She talked to Olivia alone for an hour while I sat in the waiting room. When the session ended, Allegra asked to speak with me privately. She said Olivia was showing signs of severe trauma and depression. She recommended therapy twice a week and possibly medication to help with the anxiety and intrusive thoughts. She also suggested family therapy to help repair the relationships with Ruby and Leo. I agreed to everything and scheduled the next appointment before we left. 2 days later, I sat in the courtroom holding a folder with all my evidence while Axel and Jolene stared at me from across the room. Their lawyer stood up and told the judge this was just a big misunderstanding between teenagers. He said Axel was a good student who never caused trouble, and that Olivia was making things up because she was mad at him. I felt my hands shaking as I listened to him paint my daughter as a liar. The judge asked to see my evidence, and I passed forward the threatening messages, the security footage of the gray sedan, and Olivia's written statement about what happened. He spent 20 minutes reviewing everything while the courtroom stayed silent. Jolene kept whispering to her lawyer and shooting angry looks at me. The judge finally looked up and said the evidence was clear that Axel posed a threat to our family. He granted the protective order right there and told Axel he had to stay at least 500 feet away from our house and the kids' schools. Axel's face went red and Jolene started crying, but the judge said any violation would result in immediate arrest. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Detective Copeland met me in the parking lot and told me he knew the protective order was just paper. He said Axel might not care about breaking it if he was angry enough. My relief disappeared as fast as it came. He explained that he'd arranged for police to drive through our neighborhood more often, and that any violation would mean Axel got arrested on the spot. He suggested we change up our routines and stay aware of our surroundings at all times. I thanked him and drove home, checking my mirrors every few seconds. That afternoon, I was making lunch when I looked out the window and saw the gray sedan parked 2 blocks down. My heart started racing, and I grabbed my phone to call 911. I gave them the license plate number and told them about the protective order. The operator said officers were on their way and to stay inside. I watched through the window as 2 police cars pulled onto our street within 5 minutes. The sedan's engine started and it sped away before the officers could reach it. One officer came to take my statement, and I showed him photos of the car from our security footage. He said they would watch for the vehicle, but proving Axel was driving would be hard without catching him in the act. I felt so frustrated knowing that a piece of paper couldn't actually stop him from watching us. That evening, a man in a police uniform knocked on our door and introduced himself as School Resource Officer Gabriel Conway. He said Detective Copeland asked him to talk to us about keeping Ruby and Leo safe at the school. We sat at the kitchen table while he explained his plan. He would personally check who picked up the kids every day, and their teachers knew about the situation without knowing details. He wrote his cell phone number on a card and told me to call him right away if I saw anything suspicious near the schools. His calm way of talking made me feel a little less scared about sending the kids back. He promised Ruby and Leo would be safe and that he took protective orders very seriously. After he left, I felt like maybe we had people on our side who actually cared. The next day, Olivia came home from her second therapy session with Allegra and knocked on my bedroom door. She asked if Ruby and Leo could come talk to her. I was shocked but tried not to show it as I went to get them. They followed me upstairs looking nervous and stood in Olivia's doorway like they were scared to go in. Olivia sat on her bed and told them she was trying to keep them safe from someone bad. She said she was sorry for making them think she didn't love them anymore. Ruby didn't wait for anything else and just ran across the room to hug her. Leo followed right behind, and all three of them were crying while holding each other. I stood in the hallway with tears running down my face, watching my kids together again. Olivia kept saying sorry over and over, and Ruby kept saying it was okay. Leo just held on to both his sisters like he was afraid they would disappear. I left them alone and went downstairs to tell Suresh what was happening. The next morning, I woke up early and went to make coffee. When I opened the front door to get the newspaper, I saw a dead bird on our porch. There was a note attached to it with string that said, "Protective orders don't protect anyone." My hands started shaking so bad I dropped my coffee mug. I called Detective Copeland right away, and he said he was coming over immediately. He arrived in 15 minutes and took photos of everything. He put the bird and note in evidence bags and told me this was a clear violation of the protective order. He said it also counted as criminal threatening, which was a serious charge. He called someone on his radio and said to put out a warrant for Axel's arrest. Within 3 hours, he called to say police had picked up Axel at his house. I felt relieved until Jolene called my phone screaming that I was ruining her son's life. I hung up on her without saying anything. Detective Copeland came back that evening to tell me Axel was being held overnight in juvenile detention. He said the prosecutor was now looking at adding stalking and criminal threatening to the charges. The dead bird plus all the other evidence made a strong case that Axel was dangerous and getting worse. He warned me that Axel's lawyer would argue for bail by saying he wasn't a flight risk and had family here. The bail hearing was scheduled for the next day. I barely slept that night thinking about Axel getting out. I went to the bail hearing with our lawyer the next morning. The judge let me make a victim impact statement, and I stood up and told him everything. I described finding Ruby with scissors cutting her own hair. I talked about Leo wetting the bed and having nightmares. I explained that Olivia had thoughts about dying because she felt so trapped. The judge's face got more serious as I talked. Axel's lawyer argued that Axel had strong family ties and wasn't dangerous. The judge looked at all the evidence again and set bail at $50,000. He said Axel would need GPS monitoring and had to stay at his house. I thought that would keep him locked up, but Jolene posted bail within 2 hours. Axel was released to her custody with an ankle monitor on. I felt sick knowing Axel was back at his house just 3 blocks away. Detective Copeland called and explained that the GPS would alert police if Axel came within 500 feet of our home or the kids' schools. That didn't make me feel much better. Suresh and I spent that afternoon installing motion sensor lights all around our house. We got a camera doorbell that would record everyone who came near our front door. I bought pepper spray and started carrying it everywhere I went. Suresh changed all our outdoor light bulbs to brighter ones. We checked every window lock twice and made sure the alarm system was working right. When Olivia found out Axel was out on bail, she started breathing really fast and couldn't calm down. I called Allegra, and she did an emergency phone session right then. I could hear her teaching Olivia grounding techniques through the speaker. She reminded Olivia that Axel was watched constantly now, and any violation would send him straight back to jail. Allegra suggested Olivia might want to try a support group for teenage assault survivors. Olivia agreed to go to the next meeting. After they hung up, Olivia came downstairs and asked if she could sleep in my room that night. I said yes and set up blankets on our floor for her. I felt proud that she was willing to accept help and try new things to feel better. The next morning, I drove Ruby to the school myself because I wanted to see the new safety measures in action. Gabriel Conway was waiting at the front entrance when we pulled up, and he walked over to our car with a friendly smile that made Ruby feel safe. He opened her door and helped her out, then walked beside her all the way to her classroom door, while I watched from the parking lot with my phone ready to call 911 if anything seemed wrong. I saw him check the hallways and peek into the classroom before letting Ruby go inside, and when he came back out, he gave me a thumbs up that made some of the tension leave my shoulders. At recess time, I drove back and parked where I could see the playground, and Gabriel was there too, standing near the fence and scanning the area while Ruby played on the swings with her friends. She looked so small and happy, and I heard her singing one of her favorite songs as she pumped her legs to go higher. On the drive home that afternoon, Ruby sang the whole way, and I realized I hadn't heard her voice in weeks because she'd stopped making any noise at all during those awful months. The sound filled our car and made me want to cry with relief that she was coming back to herself. A few days later, Leo had his first baseball practice since everything fell apart, and I was shocked when Olivia came downstairs in jeans and asked if she could come watch him play. Suresh and I looked at each other with surprise and hope. Then we all piled into the car together as a family for the first time in over a month. Leo couldn't stop grinning in the back seat, and he kept turning around to make sure Olivia was really there, and not just a dream. When we got to the field, Leo ran onto the diamond with more energy than I'd seen from him in weeks, and he kept glancing at the bleachers to check that his big sister was still sitting there. He caught every ball that came his way, hit 3 line drives during batting practice, and ran the bases faster than any of his teammates. After practice ended, he sprinted over to where Olivia sat and started showing her this new batting technique his coach had taught him, demonstrating the stance and the swing while she watched with real interest on her face. She told him he looked like a professional player and gave him a high five that made him beam with pride. And I saw something spark in his eyes that had been dead for weeks. Hope was coming back to my son. That same afternoon, my phone rang and Detective Copeland's name appeared on the screen, making my stomach clench with worry about what new problem had come up. He told me the forensic team had finished analyzing everything on Axel's phone, and they found the video he'd recorded of what he did to Olivia in that basement. My hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone, but he kept talking and said they also found evidence that Axel had sent the video to at least 4 of his friends through a messaging app. This discovery meant they could add distribution of child sexual abuse material to the charges against him, which carried much more serious penalties than what he was already facing. The prosecutor believed this new evidence created a really strong case for keeping Axel locked up if he violated his bail conditions even once, because it showed a pattern of dangerous behavior and total lack of understanding about what he'd done wrong. I felt vindicated hearing that we had proof of everything Olivia had described, but I also felt sick knowing that video existed somewhere in the world and that other people had seen my daughter's worst moment. Detective Copeland said the tech team was working to track down everyone who received the video so they could delete all copies and potentially press charges against anyone who kept it or shared it further. 2 days later, I was making lunch when someone started pounding on our front door and screaming at the top of their lungs. I looked through the peephole and saw Jolene standing on our porch with her face red and twisted with rage, yelling that Olivia was a lying little bitch who was ruining her son's future over nothing. She kept screaming that Axel was a good boy who would never hurt anyone, and that we were destroying his life with our fake accusations and made-up stories. I grabbed my phone and started recording her rant through the door while I dialed 911 with my other hand, and Jolene didn't seem to care that she was violating the protective order that said she had to stay away from our house. She banged on the door so hard I thought she might break it down, and she threatened to make us all pay for what we were doing to her baby. The 911 operator stayed on the line with me while police cars rushed to our address, and within 5 minutes, 2 officers were pulling up to our curb. Jolene was still screaming when they grabbed her arms and told her she was under arrest for violating the protective order, and she fought them while they put handcuffs on her wrists. One officer came to talk to me after they put Jolene in the back of the police car, and he said this incident would really strengthen our case because it showed the whole family was willing to break the law to intimidate us. He told me there was a good chance the judge would revoke Axel's bail now that his mother had proven they couldn't follow court orders. I felt shaken by how close Jolene had gotten to our home, but I also felt relieved that everything had been recorded and documented. The prosecutor called me the very next day to explain what was happening with the case now that we had Jolene's violation and the new evidence from Axel's phone. She said they were filing an emergency motion to revoke Axel's bail because the family had shown they couldn't be trusted to follow the rules, and the hearing was scheduled for 3 days from now. The prosecutor wanted Olivia to be prepared to testify if the judge asked to hear from her directly, which made my heart sink because I knew how scared she was of seeing Axel face to face. I called Allegra right away, and she came over that evening to work with Olivia on coping strategies for being in the same room as the person who hurt her. Allegra taught her breathing exercises and grounding techniques, and she helped Olivia practice what she would say if the judge asked her questions. The prosecutor had promised to request special accommodations like a screen between Olivia and Axel if she had to testify, so she wouldn't have to look at him while she talked about what happened. Olivia was still terrified, but she said she would go to the hearing because she wanted Axel locked up where he couldn't hurt anyone else. 3 days later, we all got dressed up and drove to the courthouse for the bail revocation hearing, and Olivia sat between Allegra and our lawyer in the front row, while Suresh and I sat right behind them. The prosecutor stood up and presented all the evidence to the judge, including photos of the dead bird on our porch, the recording of Jolene's threatening visit, and a detailed report about the disturbing content found on Axel's phone. She explained that Axel had created and distributed child sexual abuse material, which showed he was dangerous and had no respect for the law or for his victims' well-being. Axel's lawyer argued that his mother had acted on her own without his knowledge, and that he shouldn't be punished for something she did when he was sitting at home following all the rules of his bail. The judge listened to both sides without saying much. Then he reviewed all the documents and evidence for what felt like forever. Finally, he looked up and said he was revoking Axel's bail based on the family's demonstrated willingness to violate court orders and the serious nature of the new charges. He ordered Axel to be held in juvenile detention until his trial, and 2 officers came forward to put handcuffs on Axel's wrists. I watched them lead him out of the courtroom through a side door, and I felt like I could finally take a full breath for the first time since this nightmare started. That evening, we sat down together for dinner as a complete family, all 5 of us around the table for the first time in 6 weeks. Olivia came down from her room without being asked and took her usual seat instead of hiding upstairs like she'd been doing for so long. Ruby immediately claimed the chair right next to Olivia and reached over to hold her big sister's hand while we passed around the food, and Olivia let her do it without pulling away. Leo talked nonstop about his upcoming baseball game and how his team was going to win the championship this year, and his excitement filled the room with an energy we hadn't felt in months. Suresh and I kept making eye contact across the table, sharing looks of cautious hope as we watched our family slowly coming back together after being torn apart. The conversation felt almost normal, with everyone talking about their days and making plans for the weekend. Though I noticed Olivia still jumped a little whenever someone dropped a fork or closed a cabinet too loud. She was healing, but the damage was still there under the surface, and I knew it would take a long time before she felt truly safe again. The following week, Olivia started going to the support group for teenage assault survivors that Allegra had recommended, and she came home from her first meeting looking completely worn out, but somehow less alone than before. She sat with me in the kitchen and told me it had helped to hear other girls talking about their experiences, because she realized she wasn't the only person in the world dealing with these kinds of feelings. One girl in the group was much further along in her recovery, and had shared her story about how life eventually started feeling normal again, which gave Olivia hope that she might get there too someday. I felt grateful that she was building a support network outside our family, because I knew she needed to connect with people who truly understood what she was going through in ways that I never could. The other girls in the group had been where Olivia was now, and they could offer her guidance and understanding that even the best therapist couldn't provide. A few days after that, Detective Copeland called with another update about the legal case moving forward. He said the prosecutor had decided to offer Axel a plea deal, rather than taking the case to trial, which would require him to plead guilty to sexual assault, extortion, and distribution of child sexual abuse material. In exchange for accepting responsibility and pleading guilty to all charges, they would recommend that he serve time in juvenile detention until he turned 21 years old, followed by mandatory registration as a sex offender and 10 years of probation with strict conditions. Axel's lawyer was currently reviewing the offer with him and his family, and we should know within a week whether he would accept the deal or force us to go through a full trial. Detective Copeland also mentioned that the prosecutor wanted to know if Olivia would be willing to prepare a victim impact statement that could be read at the sentencing hearing if Axel took the plea deal. I told him I would talk to Olivia about it, but I already knew the idea of standing up in court and describing what happened would be too much for her to handle right now. That same afternoon, I took Olivia to her regular family therapy session with Allegra, and we spent most of the time discussing the plea deal and what it would mean for our family going forward. Olivia said she absolutely did not want to go through a trial where she would have to sit on a witness stand and answer detailed questions about the worst night of her life in front of a room full of strangers. She told us she was willing to write down her feelings in a victim impact statement, because she wanted the judge to understand how much damage Axel had caused, but she didn't think she could stand up and read it out loud in a courtroom while Axel sat there listening. Allegra suggested that I could read the statement for her, or that the judge could review it privately in his chambers without anyone else present, and the prosecutor had already confirmed that both of those options were completely acceptable. Olivia thought about it for a few minutes while she twisted her hands together. Then she decided she would write the statement and let me read it to the court if Axel ended up accepting the plea deal, and we moved forward to sentencing. 3 days later, Detective Copeland called to tell me that Axel had accepted the plea deal and would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for the recommended sentence. The sentencing hearing got scheduled for exactly 2 weeks from that phone call, which gave us time to prepare, but also meant 2 more weeks of waiting and worrying. I sat down with Olivia at the kitchen table that same evening and asked if she felt ready to write her victim impact statement, and she nodded slowly while twisting her hands together. We spent the next 3 hours working on it together, with me typing while she talked and cried and sometimes had to take breaks to calm down. She described the fear that controlled every moment of her life after that night, how she would wake up from nightmares where Axel was hurting Ruby and Leo while she watched helplessly. She wrote about the shame she felt even though she knew logically that nothing was her fault, about how she scrubbed her skin raw in the shower trying to feel clean again. The hardest part to read was when she described missing her siblings so much it physically hurt, sitting outside their schools just to see them from a distance because staying away felt like dying slowly. She wrote about the constant worry that kept her awake at night, checking and rechecking locks and windows, jumping at every sound or shadow. She explained how she stopped eating lunch at the school because food made her sick, how she failed her driving test twice because panic attacks hit her in the car. She described throwing away every photo of herself with Ruby and Leo because looking at their faces made the pain unbearable, and how she told people she was an only child because talking about her siblings meant acknowledging what she was doing to them. Near the end of the statement, she wrote about never fully trusting people again, about how this experience changed something basic inside her that might never go back to normal. Reading her words broke my heart into smaller pieces than I knew existed, but I also felt honored that she trusted me enough to share this pain and let me help her tell the court what Axel had really done to our family. The 2 weeks between that night and the sentencing hearing passed in the strangest way, mixing completely normal family moments with constant reminders of why we were heading to court. Ruby had a school concert on Thursday where she sang a solo in front of the whole auditorium, and Olivia sat in the 3rd row clapping and cheering louder than anyone else when Ruby hit her high notes perfectly. Leo's baseball team made it to the playoffs after winning their division, and all 5 of us showed up to the game wearing matching shirts with Leo's number on them. We sat together in the bleachers eating hot dogs and screaming encouragement, and when Leo hit a double that brought in 2 runs, Olivia jumped up and down hugging me and Suresh. These moments felt precious in a way they never had before, like we were all aware of how close we came to losing this, and determined not to take it for granted anymore. I took photos constantly during those 2 weeks, filling my phone with pictures of Olivia helping Ruby with homework, of Leo and Olivia playing catch in the backyard, of all three kids piled on the couch watching movies. Every time I looked at those images, I reminded myself that we were healing, that our family was coming back together even though we still had hard days ahead. The morning of the sentencing hearing arrived, and I woke up at 5 feeling like I might throw up from nervousness. I got dressed in the nice outfit I had picked out days earlier, then went to check on Olivia and found her already awake and staring at her ceiling. Suresh drove us to the courthouse while Allegra met us in the parking lot, and the four of us walked inside together with me carrying the printed copy of Olivia's statement in a folder. The courtroom felt huge and cold, with wooden benches and a high ceiling that made every sound echo. Axel sat at a table with his lawyer, wearing a button-up shirt and looking smaller than I remembered, and Jolene sat in the back row glaring at us with her arms crossed. The judge entered and everyone stood up. Then we all sat down again and the prosecutor began explaining the plea agreement to the court. When it was time for the victim impact statement, I stood up on shaking legs and walked to the front of the courtroom, unfolding the papers with hands that trembled so badly I almost dropped them. I started reading Olivia's words out loud, my voice cracking on almost every sentence as I described the fear and shame and isolation she experienced. I talked about Ruby cutting her hair and Leo wetting the bed, about how our whole family lived in terror for weeks while Axel watched us and sent threatening messages. The judge listened carefully, leaning forward slightly and making notes while I spoke, and when I finished, he looked directly at Axel for a long moment before speaking. He talked about the serious nature of sexual assault and extortion, about how Axel had not only hurt Olivia, but had terrorized an entire family, including 2 small children. He explained that these crimes showed a pattern of manipulation and cruelty that required significant consequences, and that while Axel was still young, he needed to understand the lasting harm he had caused. Then the judge accepted the plea deal and sentenced Axel to juvenile detention until his 21st birthday, followed by registration as a sex offender and 10 years of probation with strict conditions. I felt something heavy lift off my shoulders as the guards led Axel away, and when I turned around, Olivia was crying but also smiling slightly, and I knew she felt the same relief. After the sentencing ended, we stood in the courthouse hallway while Detective Copeland came over to give us some final information about what would happen next. He explained that Axel would be transferred within 48 hours to a secure juvenile facility about 2 hours away from our neighborhood, which meant he would be far enough that we wouldn't accidentally run into him anywhere. The GPS ankle monitor would come off since he was going into custody, but the system would notify us immediately if he ever got released or transferred to a different facility. Detective Copeland also mentioned that Jolene was facing her own charges for violating the protective order when she came to our house screaming and for making threats against our family. Her case was still working through the court system, but the prosecutor expected she would end up with probation and mandatory anger management classes at minimum. I thanked Detective Copeland for everything he had done to help us, for believing Olivia and taking our fears seriously when we first came to him. He shook my hand and told me he was glad we got justice. Then he handed me his card again and said to call any time if we needed anything else. Walking out of that courthouse felt different from walking in, like we were finally starting a new chapter instead of being stuck in the nightmare that had controlled our lives for months. The next week, Gabriel Conway came to our house to talk about establishing a new normal at the kids' schools now that the immediate threat was gone. He explained that Ruby no longer needed a teacher escort between classes, but all her teachers would stay aware of the situation in case she had any emotional reactions or needed support. Leo's coach knew to watch for signs of worry during practices and games, and to check in with him regularly to make sure he felt safe and happy. Gabriel also mentioned that the school community had rallied around our family in quiet ways, with teachers and parents offering help without making us feel like victims or gossip subjects. He said the principal wanted us to know that both schools would continue their increased safety measures, not just for our kids but for all students, because our case had helped them realize they needed better protocols. I felt grateful for the discretion and support, for the way people were helping us without making a big deal out of it or treating us differently. Olivia kept going to therapy with Allegra twice a week, and I could see changes in her that showed she was healing, even though the process wasn't always smooth or easy. She started making breakfast for Ruby and Leo again, waking up early to cook pancakes or scrambled eggs like she used to before everything happened. Some mornings were harder than others and she would just put out cereal, but the effort itself mattered more than the specific food. She began helping Leo with his math homework at the kitchen table, explaining problems patiently and high-fiving him when he got answers right. Ruby was allowed to sit in Olivia's room while she did her own schoolwork, and sometimes I would walk past and see them both at Olivia's desk working quietly together. The physical distance that had existed between them for so long was shrinking bit by bit, and I often found all 3 kids piled together on the couch watching movies or playing video games. The healing wasn't a straight line going up. There were still bad days where Olivia locked her door and didn't come out, but the good days were starting to outnumber the bad ones. 3 months after the sentencing, Olivia came downstairs one Saturday morning and asked if she could invite some friends over to watch movies that night. I felt so happy hearing that question because it was the first time since everything happened that she wanted to do something normal and social and teenage. Suresh and I made ourselves scarce that evening, hanging out in our bedroom upstairs while a group of 5 girls took over the living room with popcorn and blankets. I could hear them talking and laughing through the floor, and at one point Olivia's genuine laugh rang out loud and clear, making tears spring to my eyes. That sound represented so much progress, so much healing, so many steps forward from the terrified girl who had been living in our house just months earlier. Her friends knew something bad had happened, but they respected her privacy and didn't push for details, and their acceptance helped Olivia feel less alone and isolated. When the girls left around 11 that night, Olivia came upstairs to say goodnight, and she looked lighter somehow, like part of the weight she had been carrying had finally lifted. Around that same time, Ruby's teacher called me at home with an update that made my heart swell. She said Ruby's grades and behavior had improved so much over the past few months that she was back to being the happy, creative student she remembered from the beginning of the year. Ruby had stopped asking questions about why Olivia didn't love her, and instead she talked excitedly during sharing time about things they did together now. She was drawing pictures of our family again during art class, but these new drawings showed everyone standing close together and smiling instead of the sad, separated figures from before. The teacher sent home Ruby's latest drawing, and I hung it on the refrigerator with magnets, positioning it right at Olivia's eye level so she would see it every morning when she came down for breakfast. The picture showed 5 stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sun, with "My Family" written across the top in Ruby's careful printing. Leo came running into the kitchen one afternoon, waving a paper and shouting that he made the all-star baseball team, and Olivia was the first person he wanted to tell. She picked him up and spun him around even though he was getting big for that, both of them laughing and celebrating together. She promised to come to every single one of his all-star games, and that weekend she spent 2 hours in the backyard helping him practice his pitching technique. I watched from the kitchen window while she showed him how to grip the ball differently and where to aim, her patience and encouragement reminding me of the big sister she had always been before Axel tried to take that away from her. Leo's nightmares had completely stopped over the past month, and he was sleeping through the night in his own bed without any accidents. His confidence was coming back along with his relationship with Olivia, and seeing them together made me believe we really were going to be okay. Detective Copeland called one final time with news about Jolene's case, and I put him on speaker so Suresh could hear too. He told us that Jolene had pleaded guilty to violating the protective order and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, plus mandatory anger management classes twice a week. She was also required to stay at least 1,000 feet away from our family at all times, and any violation would result in immediate jail time. Detective Copeland mentioned that our case had helped the police department develop better protocols for handling threats against minors, and he thanked me for being so persistent in protecting my family even when things seemed impossible. I thanked him right back for believing us from the beginning and taking our fears seriously instead of dismissing them, and I told him we couldn't have gotten through this without his help and support. Allegra brought up the idea of family therapy during one of her private sessions with Olivia, and within a week we were all sitting together in her office for the first time. Ruby sat between me and Olivia on the couch, while Leo perched on Suresh's lap in the armchair, and Allegra explained that we needed to talk about what happened, so everyone could understand and heal together. She started by asking Ruby and Leo to share how they felt during those scary months. When Olivia stayed away from them and Ruby's voice got really quiet, as she described feeling like she must have done something terrible to make her big sister hate her. Leo talked about his nightmares and how he stopped playing baseball because it wasn't fun without Olivia watching, and I watched Olivia's face crumble as she listened to how much pain her distance had caused them. Allegra guided Olivia through explaining in simple terms that a bad person had threatened to hurt Ruby, and Leo if she didn't stay away from them, and that she was trying to protect them the whole time, even though it looked like she didn't love them anymore. Ruby climbed into Olivia's lap and wrapped her arms around her neck, and Leo came over to hug them both, and all 3 of my kids cried together while Suresh and I held each other. We spent the rest of that first session creating what Allegra called a family safety plan, where we all agreed to tell each other if we felt scared or worried, instead of keeping secrets to protect each other. Olivia promised she would never try to handle something dangerous alone again, and Ruby and Leo promised they would come to us if anyone ever made them feel unsafe or uncomfortable. Allegra gave us homework to have a family meeting once a week, where everyone could share their feelings, and we scheduled our next therapy session for 2 weeks later. Suresh found a support group for parents of assault survivors that met every Thursday evening at a community center across town, and we started attending together the week after our first family therapy session. The first night felt awkward as we sat in a circle of folding chairs with 8 other parents who all had similar stories of their kids being hurt and the aftermath of dealing with trauma. A mom named Jamie shared that her daughter was assaulted 3 years ago and had just graduated from college with honors, and hearing that gave me hope that Olivia could have a normal future despite everything she'd been through. A dad talked about how hard it was to watch his son struggle with nightmares and anxiety, and I felt less alone knowing other parents understood the helplessness of not being able to fix your child's pain. The group leader taught us strategies for supporting our kids while also taking care of ourselves, like setting boundaries around how much we talk about the trauma and making sure we do things that bring us joy. Suresh and I exchanged phone numbers with 3 other couples after the meeting, and over the next few months we built our own support network, where we could text each other on hard days or meet for coffee when we needed to talk to someone who really understood. 4 months passed with Olivia continuing therapy twice a week, and our family gradually finding a new normal. And then Olivia came home one afternoon waving her driver's license and grinning bigger than I'd seen in almost a year. She asked if she could drive Ruby to the school sometimes because she wanted to spend more time with her little sister and make up for all the months she'd missed. And I felt my throat get tight with emotion at her desire to reclaim that protective big sister role. I agreed, but told her she had to text me as soon as they arrived safely at the school, and the next morning I stood in the driveway watching Olivia carefully back out with Ruby buckled in the passenger seat. Ruby was bouncing with excitement about riding with her big sister, and through the car window I could see them both smiling as they drove away together. I checked my phone obsessively until Olivia's text came through saying they'd arrived, and when Ruby got home that afternoon, she couldn't stop talking about how cool it was to be driven to the school by Olivia instead of taking the bus. Over the next few weeks, Olivia drove Ruby to the school 3 mornings a week, and I would watch them leave together and feel like we'd reached an important milestone in rebuilding what had been broken. The school year wound down as spring turned to early summer, and Leo's baseball team made it all the way to the championship game. Olivia spent an entire Saturday afternoon painting a huge banner with Leo's number on it, and Ruby cut up newspapers to make colorful pom-poms for everyone to wave during the game. We all piled into the car together on game day and claimed seats in the bleachers behind home plate, and I felt grateful that we could be there as a complete family again. Leo kept looking over at us in the stands, and every time he caught Olivia's eye, she would wave the banner and cheer for him. The game stayed close through all 6 innings, and in the bottom of the last inning with 2 outs and a runner on third, Leo stepped up to bat. I held my breath as the pitcher wound up, and then Leo connected with the ball and sent it flying over the left fielder's head for a double that brought the winning run home. We all rushed onto the field with the other families, and a photographer who was covering the game for the local paper captured our family in a huge group hug with Leo in the middle. The photo showed all 5 of us with genuine smiles and joy on our faces, and later that week when I got the digital copy, I immediately made it my phone's wallpaper. Every time I looked at it, I remembered how far we'd come from those dark weeks when our family felt like it was falling apart. Summer arrived with hot weather and long days, and Olivia surprised us by getting a job at the community pool as a lifeguard. Allegra said during one of our family sessions that this was a really good sign because it showed Olivia felt ready to take on responsibility and be around lots of people again. Olivia had to go through training and get certified, and on her first day of work, I drove her there and watched her climb up into the lifeguard chair, wearing her red swimsuit and whistle around her neck. She started bringing Ruby and Leo to the pool during her break times, and I would sit in a lounge chair reading while keeping one eye on them. Olivia taught Ruby how to dive off the board without belly flopping, and she played endless rounds of Marco Polo with Leo in the shallow end. The other lifeguards were mostly kids from her high school, and within a few weeks, Olivia was going to movies and parties with them after their shifts ended. She started smiling more and laughing at dinner, and one night she stayed up late watching a comedy with us instead of going straight to her room. Her social life was rebuilding naturally, and I could see genuine happiness returning to her face instead of the fake smiles she used to force. We planned a family vacation to the beach for late July, our first trip together since everything had happened almost a year ago. I worried that Olivia might struggle with being away from home and her therapy routine, but she seemed excited about the trip and helped Ruby pack her suitcase. We drove 4 hours to a beach town and checked into a hotel with 2 adjoining rooms, and I noticed that Olivia didn't obsessively check the locks on our door or peer out the windows looking for threats. She unpacked her stuff and immediately asked if we could go to the beach, and we all changed into our swimsuits and headed down to the sand. Olivia built elaborate sandcastles with Ruby, complete with moats and towers, and she buried Leo up to his neck in sand while he giggled uncontrollably. We spent 3 days swimming, collecting shells and eating ice cream on the boardwalk, and every night we walked along the beach together watching the sunset. On our last evening there, Suresh took a photo of me standing with all 3 kids, the ocean waves behind us and the pink sky overhead. Everyone was smiling real smiles, not forced or fake, and when I looked at that photo later, we looked like any normal happy family on vacation. Nobody watching us would have guessed what we'd survived to get to that moment. Olivia started her senior year of high school in late August with a completely different attitude than she'd had the year before. She talked excitedly about her classes and started researching colleges with strong psychology programs because she wanted to help other trauma survivors someday. Her grades stayed strong, and her teachers commented during parent conferences about how mature and focused she seemed compared to other seniors. She joined the peer counseling program at the school and went through training to help other students who needed someone to talk to. The counseling coordinator told me that Olivia was a natural at making people feel safe and heard, and that she was helping train other peer counselors to recognize signs of abuse. Olivia came home one day and told me she'd helped a freshman girl who was pressured by an older boyfriend, and that she'd connected the girl with resources to get help. I watched my daughter turn her painful experience into something meaningful, and I felt incredibly proud of her strength and determination to make sure other kids didn't have to suffer alone like she had. Ruby turned 7 in October, and she insisted that Olivia had to help plan her entire birthday party. They spent 3 weeks working together on decorations, making construction paper chains, and painting a big banner that said, "Ruby is 7." They planned games like musical chairs and pin the tail on the donkey, and they baked cupcakes together the night before the party. I watched their relationship strengthen through this shared project, seeing them laugh together and negotiate over party details like whether to have a princess theme or a rainbow theme. The day of the party, 12 of Ruby's friends came over and ran around our backyard playing games and eating cake, and Ruby dragged Olivia around introducing her to everyone. I heard Ruby tell her best friend that Olivia was the best sister in the whole world, and I saw Olivia's eyes get watery before she pulled Ruby into a tight hug. I took photos throughout the party, capturing moments of them laughing together, and Ruby beaming with pride at having her big sister there. The love between them had been fully restored, maybe even stronger than before because they'd survived something terrible and come out the other side together. Leo came home from the school one day in early November and announced that he wanted to try out for the travel baseball team, which was way more competitive than his regular league. He asked Olivia if she would help him practice, and she immediately agreed and cleared her schedule to work with him every evening after her lifeguard shift ended. I would watch from the kitchen window as they spent an hour in the backyard, Olivia pitching to Leo and coaching him on his swing technique. She showed him how to adjust his stance and keep his eye on the ball, and her patience reminded me of the big sister she'd always been before everything happened. The tryouts came in mid-November, and our whole family went to watch Leo show the coaches what he could do. When the roster got posted a week later and Leo's name was on it, he ran to find Olivia at the school and tell her first. He told everyone who would listen that he made the team because of Olivia's coaching, and he asked her to promise she'd come to all his games. She promised she would be there for every single one, and she kept that promise all season long, missing only one game when she had to visit a college she was considering. Their relationship had become stronger than ever, built on a foundation of survived trauma and renewed trust. I met with Allegra alone one afternoon in December, while Olivia was at the school, and she told me that Olivia had made remarkable progress over the past year. She explained that Olivia had developed healthy ways to cope with her anxiety and bad memories, and that she'd processed most of the trauma through their work together. Allegra said that while Olivia would always carry the experience with her, and might have hard days, it no longer controlled her daily life, or stopped her from doing things she wanted to do. She recommended reducing Olivia's individual therapy to once a week since she was doing so well, and she suggested we continue family therapy for a few more months to keep working on our communication. I agreed with both recommendations and asked if Olivia would be okay long-term, and Allegra smiled and said she believed Olivia would not just be okay, but would thrive because she'd done the hard work of healing. I left that session feeling proud of how hard my daughter had worked to get better, and grateful that we'd found Allegra to guide us through the darkest time of our lives. 6 months after Axel got sentenced, I opened the mailbox and found an official letter from the juvenile detention facility where he was being held. My hands shook as I read that he completed some kind of treatment program for teenage offenders, and wrote an apology letter he wanted to send to Olivia. The facility explained they would screen it first to make sure it wasn't threatening or inappropriate, and Olivia could choose whether she wanted to read it or not. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter for a long time before I called Olivia downstairs to talk about it. She listened quietly while I explained what the facility was offering, and I watched her face carefully to see if she looked scared or upset. She thought about it for maybe 30 seconds before she told me she didn't want to read his apology, because she was focused on her future now and not on him anymore. She said she appreciated being given the choice instead of having it forced on her, and that meant more than anything Axel could write in a letter. I felt so proud of her strength in that moment, proud that she knew exactly what she needed for her own healing, and wasn't afraid to say it out loud. The early fall afternoon arrived with leaves starting to change colors outside our windows, and I stood in our backyard watching all 3 of my kids playing together like they used to before everything happened. Olivia was pushing Ruby on the swing set while Ruby squealed with delight, and Leo practiced his pitching against the fence nearby, and their laughter filled the air around me like music I thought I'd never hear again. Our family wasn't perfect, and we all still had moments when anxiety crept in or sadness hit us unexpectedly. But we were together, and we were safe, and we were healing one day at a time. I thought about how close we came to losing Olivia completely, when she was drowning in fear and isolation, and I felt overwhelming gratitude that she trusted me enough to let me help her fight back. The threat that tried to tear us apart ended up making us stronger in ways I never expected. And I knew we could handle whatever challenges came next because we would face them as a family who survived the worst and came out the other side. That's how it went down from my side. Now I want to hear what you think because I know half of you are already forming strong opinions. Drop them in the comments, I'll be reading through later. You always keep things interesting.